The Spin-off Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get-advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour government. A podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards it.
There's a radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour government. Made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on The Spin-off or wherever you get your podcasts. Hey, Annabelle, just looking at this in the Gone by Lunchtime group chat, and there's a message here from you that reads, "Cis white male, more like cuck white male, Toby is such a bedwetting sack of dicks." Did you mean to put that in the group chat?
No, I think I think I was hacked.
Well, I'd just like to say, in my own defence, it is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs and comes up short again and again. At the worst, if he fails, at least he fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who knew neither victory nor defeat.
That's some powerful shit.
Kia ora tātou, this is Gone by Lunchtime, ko Toby Aho. Ben Thomas is opposite me, to my left is Annabelle Lee-Mather, and making everything work is Samuel. Kia ora koutou.
Kia ora.
Thanks to Spin-off members who keep this thing going. We can keep going more and better. If you would like to sponsor us, do get in touch. Hit me up if you fancy being the sponsor of the Spin-off podcast, Gone by Lunchtime. Bumper list of stuff to reel off today. Jacinda Ardern's valedictory speech, the decision on COVID settings, the Greens and crybabygate, a swipe card slap down for lobbyists. But first, Three Waters. Or not Three Waters, because Three Waters no longer exists.
What's Three Waters?
If you have a question about Three Waters, all you'll get is a shrug, a kind of gaze into the void. Also, another thing that doesn't exist anymore is co-governance. What's co-governance?
What are you talking about? You sound hysterical. I really had to take 3 reporters and shake them by their shoulders and try and get them to snap out of it.
It's kind of every question on Three Waters. Don't understand what you're talking about. Could you please explain? Every question on co-governance. No such thing. Doesn't exist. These are just random words.
Closing the gaps, eh?
It's brilliant. It's brilliant. So it's 11 a.m. or it's shortly after 11 a.m. on Thursday as we speak, and by coincidence, Chris Hipkins and Kieran McAnulty, who is the Minister for Local Government, are standing in a field somewhere in the Wairarapa, announcing the changes to the artist formerly known as Three Waters.
They're just having a general chat about improved water infrastructure service delivery.
Affordable, improved infrastructure relating to water programmers going forward. It's like
the comprehensive and progressive, affordable water infrastructure.
They searched all of Wellington for the most boring bureaucrat and tasked that person with coming up with a new name for the artist formerly known as Three Waters, and that was it. And what has changed? Well, the main change, as predicted by the soothsayer Patrick Smelly and Business Desk, is that 4 entities, not to be confused with the Three Waters, which are drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater, the 4 entities are now 10 entities. And that is designed to retain the advantages of the original, which is to say the balance sheet is underpinned by the Crown. There is economy of scale and advantage in being bigger and but not as big as if there were 4 of them. The governance structure in the form of the regional representation groups, I think they're called, remains with 50% mana whenua. And critically, it means there are a heap more spaces for example, the mayors of the territorial authorities that are involved. Ben,
I've got clients in the space.
Iwi clients in the space.
Just need to,
you need to acknowledge
full
that.
disclosure
but
there.
Is that a fair summary of the structure as you see it? We're just still reading through the sheets here. I may have missed some things, but is that...
That's what it seems to be. So it seems to be that instead of having these regional representative groups, which are at a sort of high level above the, what we'd think of as the board of directors of, or what will be the board of directors of these entities. The regional representative groups sort of provide some oversight. I think they have some feedback on the statements of intent, that kind of thing. And they will move from, I think, the default under the old or the old new system. These reforms were put into legislation in December last year. Yeah. And we've gone back to the drawing board. Since the Prime Minister obviously couldn't remember what Three Waters was, he saw this law and I was like, I don't know what this is, but has anyone thought about doing anything about pipes? And so...
we need to do something about the water infrastructure in New Zealand. I think we should make it more affordable.
And so, so instead of the default setting of, I think under that regime there would be 6 local government reps and the various constituent councils would get together and vote on those or select them however they liked, and there'll be 6 iwi reps, and the various iwi in the area would select those. Instead, here, I think the idea is that every council, Hipkins said every mayor, but I think he means every council will have their own representative on that group. So there will be that sort of local voice, which was one of the big criticisms.
It's designed to assuage the concern that it was expressed around large parts of the country, certainly during the local government campaigns, that those who were involved in the ownership and provision of those water services would no longer have those roles on those boards. And I mean, if you were being cynical about it, you would say there were a lot of people who were saying, hey, how come I'm no longer involved in that? That were going to be squeezed out in these 4 mega entities. And so now there's going to be more meetings, more committees, more boards. Annabelle, what do you make of it all? It's also been kicked back in terms of timing to the middle of 2026. It's worth saying, and it's also worth saying, by the way, that it's very clear that the existing system, and almost nobody would argue with this, was unsustainable. It's very clear that a whole lot of the councils, if not all, were going to get into all sorts of trouble with either dysfunctional, broken water infrastructures and or massive rises in rates to pay for what was required. Annabelle, do you think this is going to mollify the complainants? Do you think it's going to roll into the election as an issue? What's your hot take on this?
Yes and no. I think that breaking it into 10 regional groups will quell the fears of a lot of people who feel that, the larger the grouping, the further away the decision-making comes from for the communities to whom these assets belong and who they're going to serve. In terms of what that means in terms of economy of scales, I'm not sure. Can the 10 work together to still buy the stuff that the pipes and the pumps and the bits and pieces they need at a good cost? I don't know. There's still a lot of questions around the so-called co-governance part of it.
There's no such thing as co-governance.
Well,
as
it's presented, it doesn't appear to be co-governance. It looks like essentially Māori being appointed to an electoral college or getting representation on an electoral college that then decide who the actual board is going to govern these assets. So in that sense, I mean, I think people will still purposely misinterpret it as some sort of Māori takeover, and they'll keep kicking that can along.
And that's a key question in terms of the political calculus, isn't it? ACT have been quick out of the traps with a press release headline, Māori Caucus 1, Chris Hipkins 0. So there's no question that co-governance thorn is going to continue to be focused on by various groups and parties. I suppose the hope, let's make water boring again, is that this becomes now a technical conversation. Whether or not can that happen, do you think, Ben? Or do you think this is going to be a lightning rod into the election?
Look, you've got a party like ACT which is determined to run on this, so-called co-governance issue, he pua. Hipkins has been very much trying to dial it back. I think Hipkins is right, and I think I've written columns about this, that co-governance has sort of assumed, the phrase co-governance has assumed this mammoth proportion in the popular imagination, particularly of some conservative voters, that it actually isn't. If you go to that...
it's come to be, and in fact, ACT have sometimes described it as co-government, which it is not.
Well, not just that, but, if you go to this Stop Co-Governance guy, who's been doing his public meetings where there's been a bit of frisson, most of his website doesn't talk about co-governance at all. He just uses co-governance as a kind of shorthand for any appearance of Māori culture or people in public life. Right. And, I think Hipkins saying that this is not co-governance, I don't necessarily think that's true. I think there's a variety of different mechanisms for co-governance that have been done throughout the years, and having an oversight group, I think that is co-governance. It's just not a particularly strong form of co-governance. The governance of those entities will be with the board, the management will be with professional managers, and some of the oversight capacity will come from iwi. So, I don't think it's a particularly strong case for saying co-governance doesn't exist in any form. I think it is co-governance, but it's a pretty weak form that I don't think anyone should be too worried about.
It's a very, very weak form, and that's the irony of it, that it's being presented by some quarters as this massive Māori overreach where iwi are going to have ultimate control over these resources is so not actually what it looks like on paper. It literally looks like Māori on an interviewing panel who gets to decide who's on the board. So, yeah.
I think the other thing to remember is, in terms of the politics is, how much has McAnulty and Hipkins, how much have they closed the gap between the criticisms and, what was the reform that was passed late last year? They've closed it somewhat. So I think McAnulty said there will be more councils who are happier with this situation. I think that's probably right. It's more about reducing the distance and reducing the anger in the opposition as opposed to actually just fully backing down. And so for instance, the Hawke's Bay councils, their preferred option was we should be allowed to organise amongst ourselves. We've already been doing it, 3 councils, to amalgamate within ourselves on our own steam. And in this proposal, they would be doing that, but they'd also have Gisborne and Wairoa as well. And, that's probably necessary because small councils like Wairoa, do have that sustainability issue in terms of their small rating bases. Gisborne's got to go somewhere, that sort of thing. So you're actually getting quite close to what a lot of these councils have already been proposing. And so, that may take some of the heat out of the issue, but it doesn't solve the fundamental problem, I guess, which some people claim is the fundamental problem, which is we should be able to decide.
Yeah. And they get a bit more of that decision roll back is the first point. The other point that is worth making was that the 4 entities did seem a bit weird in terms of the way they were drawn on the map. Always difficult in a country that doesn't have a state-based system. But, for example, I spent some time in Nelson during the local election campaign, and their entity, they were, ripped right through Nelson up the Hikarangi subduction zone into the east of the North Island, and it did seem pretty weird for a water infrastructure project. So
and these new bodies they essentially mimic, or the boundaries are drawn along regional council lines with a few regional councils kind of chucked together.
Let's talk about one of the big stories of last week, Annabelle, Jacinda Ardern's last appearance, certainly as an MP in Parliament. She's been keeping away from the place since her resignation in the middle of January. Hasn't appeared in the House at all, I think, until she did her valedictory last week. Did you watch?
I did, yeah. I caught up with it later on.
What did you make of it?
I thought it was sort of like quintessential Jacinda Ardern oratory, you know, a reminder of how she was able to capture people's hearts and minds back in 2020 and in 2017. You know, it was personal, it felt intimate, it was self-deprecating. I thought it was a wonderful speech, and I couldn't help but and I was watching very closely to see how it was being received by Christopher Luxon and the other politicians that were in the House when it was being delivered, and I saw them chuckle and smile a couple of times. I can't help but think that, you know, in a decade's time, our teenagers or kids will look back and they will wonder why we judged her so harshly at this moment in time.
It was a impressive peroration. Is that the right word? Peroration? The end bit.
It's got to be the right word for something.
I cannot determine what will define my time in this place, but I do hope I've demonstrated something else entirely, that you can be anxious, sensitive, kind, that you can wear your heart on the sleeve, you can be a mother or not, an ex-Mormon or not, a nerd, a crier, a hugger. You can be all of those things, and not only can you be here, you can lead. She read it more powerfully than that. I was
better when she did it.
I thought so too.
You can really say, as the first late millennial prime minister, you can definitely see somebody who's like, you know, seen The Breakfast Club a lot from an early age.
I don't know. I watched it I was in the press gallery in the House watching it.
Oh, vibes.
And you're right. Christopher Luxon was being very generous and natural, you know, just sort of laughing and very positive, as was most of the House. David Seymour wasn't there. He had headed off on a tour of the regions already, prearranged, he said. And I tell you, the one person who was slumped at the back of the House looking like a kind of cool kid on the back of the school bus was Ben Uffindale. No, not Ben Uffindale, Sam Uffindale. Sorry, Ben. Anyway, what did you think, Ben, Sam, Thomas?
Yeah, look, I didn't think it didn't reach, you know, her sort of lofty rhetorical heights. Probably a good thing.
Maybe by design.
Yeah, well, also I think that Ardern has always been, you know, pretty admirably so. She's found it harder to sing her own praises than other people's. You know, fundamentally, you know, Ardern is an extremely nice, extremely likeable person. And so there's no surprise that, you know, Luxon and other MPs, you know, especially removed from that kind of competitiveness over, you know, the general election, would have very warm feeling towards her because, you know, I mean, fundamentally, she's a very decent person who did her very best in very trying circumstances. And in a lot of cases, her very best was probably the best that you could expect from anyone in the world. And, you know, I think Chris Hipkins sort of touched on this in an interview with Joe Moyer at Newsroom, talking about how sort of it is becoming less and less common to see friendly relationships between, you know, MPs from opposing parties, you know, when they leave the debating chamber. You know, that was something that sort of was remarked on, you know, the very good spin-off event that I think was released as a Gone by Lunchtime podcast with Eric Sanford.
The Candidate Diarists event.
Chloe Swarbrick and Kerry Allen. You know, I think women MPs still have a bit more of a sense of camaraderie, but you know, because they brought, you know, and other groups who sort of, you know, Parliament is not necessarily still designed for them.
Yeah, they're probably also less likely to be vitriolic in their rhetoric in the House. I think is the other part of that.
Yeah, and the thing is, it shouldn't be a surprise, you know, that the opposition, you know, wish Ardern well. And, you know, and it shouldn't be unusual. And you know, I think on the whole it's still not. But
although it is a quite special New Zealand thing. I think it's not the case in every country. And I know talking to some people who'd watched it who were in New Zealand from abroad, and they were saying that it was very uplifting to see all the hugging at the end and the wires and all that sort of stuff, and everyone is basically on board, which is something to celebrate.
And I think it is very important that we often, when we talk about polarisation in New Zealand, we talk about internet weirdos a lot, but we don't talk about our politicians who actually, on the whole, do a good job of resisting those sort of elements, I think.
Talofa lava. I'm Madeline Chapman, editor at The Spinoff. If you have the means, consider supporting our high-quality journalism by becoming a Spinoff member. Sign up now at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
Kia ora, I'm Duncan Grieve, founder of The Spinoff. You can help us keep all of The Spinoff's award-winning journalism free for everybody by becoming a member today at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
Do you find it hard staying optimistic with all the financial news in the media? I'm Bernard Hickey, and on my podcast, When the Facts Change, I'm here to help you navigate the ever-changing landscape of economics in Aotearoa. So join the conversation every Friday on When the Facts Change, brought to you by the Spinoff Podcast Network in partnership with KiwiBank.
The COVID settings were unchanged in Cabinet on Monday, announcement we were expecting. Quite amusingly, Chris Hipkins forgot to mention it when everyone was waiting for it. And Craig McGulloch from RNZ had to say, did you make a call? And he went, oh, that's right, we did. We're leaving them. And the decision was, this is about mask wearing in health environments. But it was one that seemed to be in the balance. And it sounds as though it's one that perhaps Cabinet had a genuine vote on to which way they wanted to go. I'd like to find out more, but unfortunately Stuart Nash's donors are no longer available to let us know how it goes down there. So 2 months they're going to review the settings and then look at potentially, what's it called, test to release, which sounds like a fishing rule, but the idea is that if you get a negative rat test after 5 days or so, that then you're back out there. What do you reckon, Annabelle? You have strong feelings on this? It seems like that's the way they want to move, and keeping with much of the world, but they're not quite ready to do it.
Well, I think that most ordinary people would be totally okay that the settings are remaining in place, that the 7-day isolation remains in place, and understandably because COVID was the 6th leading causes of death in New Zealand last year, and nobody really wants to get COVID, particularly when they know that the health system is already struggling to keep up. I think the only people that are really outspokenly upset about it are business owners and Luxon, and I think this is again going to be one of those issues where Luxon finds himself out of step with the rest of the country.
It's an interesting one though, isn't it? Because Luxon said that he felt better after he had COVID a month or so ago and could have gone back out. But he's actually not on roughly the same page as some of the COVID modelers. Dion O'Neill, for example, said that they would like to see a test and release with a minimum of 5 days. But as he explained it to me, there are a lot of people currently who are not infectious, who are remaining in isolation. But then there are also people who get out of isolation while still infectious. So what they'd like to see, and they think this would result in more people in the workforce, is a minimum of 5 and a maximum of 10. But you can, if you take a robust test and you're negative after 5 days, then back you go.
Yeah, and that seems to make more sense, right? The compliance with the mandatory isolation period is ironically completely voluntary right now, right? I'm sure there are people with COVID in the supermarket.
We're not aware of anyone enforcing the rule, but it is still the law.
It's still the requirement.
It is the requirement, but I think the estimates are that anywhere between sort of 50 and 70% of the people who actually have COVID are are reporting it, and
others may not be testing for fear that they test positive.
Yeah. And I mean, look, I think it makes sense. What you're trying to do is reduce the transmissibility while having something approaching normal life. And yeah, that's right. Keeping people, if they remain infectious for longer, you keep them in isolation for longer. I don't think it'll move votes either way, in the sense that I think anyone who's really head up about it, apart from employers, is probably, making their own rules anyway.
It's interesting, isn't it, that it wasn't that long ago that it seems that we were hanging on every decision about COVID settings so tensely, and in a way this one, which was Chris Hipkins forgot to announce it in the post-cabinet.
I think what history shows us too is when you start to tutu with the rules and they start to become unclear, that's when problems happen, like when we're moving between the traffic light system
Step
and all
three,
of that.
Level 3, Step 2. That was a good one.
I mean, the other thing is,
as we head into winter, I think that protecting the health system makes sense. And if everybody's singing off the same 7-day song sheet for the next 2 months, it's not.
And I think that's
most
the
New
other
Zealanders will
reason
accept
that 2 months kind of extension is a very good idea, because it will allow us to see whether or not winter brings a kind of surge in cases or whatever.
Which you would expect.
Let's move on. We're doing quite well, actually. We're ripping through it today, it seems to me. Let's move to the, I suppose, the comic relief of recent times in Parliament, certainly in terms of the scene, which involved a group chat message sent by Elizabeth Kerekere, the Green MP, to an unknown group that referred to Chloe Swarbrick, another Green MP's bill going through Parliament and her own private member's bill not being drawn, bemoaned that, and then appeared to
bemoaned it not because one bill was more worthy than the other, but because list ranking was happening with the Greens, and so Chloe Swarbrick was getting more attention.
Because the Byzantine process of the Green list selection is underway at the moment, which means that they've published a provisional list. I'm not sure what they call it exactly, and then that list goes back to the membership. I think that's with them now or soon. An interesting thing that is different this year, just as a sidebar, is that Green members, I'm told, are able to just tick the whole thing off rather than having to, which may or may not make people less inclined to shuffle the list. But anyway, we'll see. Yeah. But yes, basically, and we've seen that a few times. Chloe Swarbrick actually went down the list quite a few spots last time. So Chloe Swarbrick was then apparently described as a crybaby in the next message. Although
this was at the same time that she was delivering a stirring speech in the House, where her voice was kind of faltering a little bit with the emotion.
The critical thing is that in the very top of the frame on Parliament TV coverage, you could see Golriz Garaman and Julian Genter receiving these messages that were not intended for the group. And it was just an absolutely all-timer of frame-by-frame analysis looking at those.
Golriz gave one of the great performances of New Zealand drama. It's like she sort of the hands over the mouth.
It was a hand clap over the mouth.
Just the bulging eyes, the sort of fainting backwards, falling over 2 rows of parliamentary seats.
I mean, it was full method. I don't think there's any suggestion she was performing.
Oh, no, not at all. No,
it couldn't have been. You did not need to hear what they were saying.
If I had seen a text like that, sent an error to one of my group chats, I would have literally exploded. Yeah. So in a way, I admire her restraint.
You would have been audible through all 10 Three Waters.
I only read about it in the Herald, and I was like laughing for 24 hours. It was like that scene of The Simpsons, where like Mr. Burns witnesses some act of cruelty, and then there's just a montage of him throughout the next day laughing in different scenes where he is, and then he's like, Smithers, I can't even remember why I was laughing, and then Smithers Smithers reminds him, and then he laughs for another day. And it's like every time that day, whenever I sort of felt, oh man, today's been such a great day, and I was like, why do I have such a warm feeling of kind of joy and happiness? And then I would remember the text again and just laugh joyously. It was like, because it just encapsulates so many great things about politics. Like Elizabeth Kitty, she's currently ranked at number 4, right? So there is no scenario if the Greens get 5% or more where she would have been in danger of missing out on being in Parliament. Yeah. And if they didn't get 5%, she would need Chloe Swarbrick to win Auckland Central with her high profile and popularity. But nonetheless, all she could think of was, why is this little upstart crybaby getting to talk in Parliament? Parliament TV, of course, being viewed by some total of about 30 people over the week.
So this was, I think, after Ardern's valedictory. So all of Parliament was drinking somewhere else except for the poor few souls who were stuck in Parliament. And it would have gone unnoticed, of course, had it not, Annabelle, been leaked, which gives it the extra kind of element. And, you could say, which is the greater crime, the putting it in the wrong chat message, or somebody knowing that this presumably would have a detrimental effect on Elizabeth Kerekere, decided to provide this information to Radio New Zealand, who then went ahead and reported it. I mean, is it a big deal, or is this really just a kind of a comedy sideshow?
It's not a big deal, but it kind of is a big deal. Oh. Like, who hasn't sent an unflattering message on the wrong Facebook thread? Personally, I actually haven't.
No,
but I know people that have. I've actually received one.
I've heard of people who have written things critically about people and then accidentally sent it to the person they're writing critically about. Again, I've never done that, but I've heard of it happen
to me.
Yeah.
I've had that happen.
You've had that happen to me. You've received an email saying,
yeah, they sent that photo. They said something about me, and then they sent the video clip from that horror movie Annabelle about the
What did they say?
I can't remember, but it was very funny, and then I messaged them back and it was a bit awkward for about a year, but it's fine. But, these things happen, and certainly it has not been a mana-enhancing situation for Elizabeth Kerekere, who, kind of had a meteoric rise through the ranks, didn't she? I think what is concerning, I don't think it means that there's going to be a coup with Ricardo and Elizabeth before the election or any of this other stuff that's being rumoured. However, I do think that it shows that there's resentment and ill-discipline kind of permeating through the ranks of the Greens, that you would leak this to RNZ, and I think that is a little bit concerning. And
certainly some schadenfreude around the traps in terms of the Greens, who sometimes tried to present a wholesome, holier-than-thou, united team image.
Whenever the centre-right leaps on issues like this, people on the left sometimes complain and say, "Oh, you're just happy because you want to believe that the left is every bit as venal and self-interested and awful as you," and we do. And it's true, and in this case, it's very funny. So it's like the Herald. There was a report. I don't know if it was even reported. I know that one of the press gallery journalists tweeted it last year. There was some kind of complaint about Elizabeth Kerekere or an altercation with staff that made it out to the press. Thomas Coughlan wrote a story sort of suggesting that there was a kind of history of infractions there. So it does look like, this real bad botch up was the opportunity to kind of pull her into line and sort of, make a statement about what's perceived as her behaviour.
Internal Green probe inquiry underway.
There's a royal commission into the crybaby issue.
Is that the full chat logs are released. In the interests of democracy and transparency, we ask for only that. Speaking of which, last subject. You got something else to add there, Ben? You look like you're going to relate one of your own experiences.
I was just going to say, I had a text mishap that same day because I had to go pick up my car, And I got a thing saying, the rego's all ready, you can come and pick it up this afternoon. And I said, hey, thanks heaps. And then I was also having another conversation about the nature of Passover, which was coming up on Good Friday. And I said, is matzah the crackers to the car dealer, But see, this is the thing, misdirected texts, you don't have to worry about them if you're pure of heart.
Yes.
Because it's just going to be a non sequitur about Jewish holiday treats.
It's just going to be a wholesome interest.
It's only
in cultural practices.
Yeah, when the misdirected texts open up a mirror to your soul, that's you got to make sure it's tidy.
I'm often sending the wrong person, hey, just checking in to see how you are. Texts, just like the whole of the phone book. Let's talk about the last thing on our list, lobbyists, of which you, in some ways, are one, Ben.
Yeah, no. Capital, the firm I'm a co-owner of, were part of that, the Guy and Espiner expose.
Yeah, you're exposed.
For sure.
Yeah. And unexpectedly, I think, Chris Hipkins announced the Monday before last, was it, that there would be a series of measures introduced to deal with the scourge, he didn't use that word, of lobbyists in New Zealand, but definitely as a response to the Guy and Espiner series, and probably, I think it's safe to say, in part prompted also by the controversy surrounding Mr. Stuart Roosevelt Nash, and which kind of, I think it's fair to say, in the public mind probably became a little bit mixed together in terms of kind of breaches of basic expectations and so on. The measures, there's going to be a review into lobbying stuff, but that's not going to come back till next year. So there's sort of a policy review.
There seems to be some
tasked with looking at it. But three kind of things in the interim. Let's see if I can remember them. The key one is the removal of the swipe cards, which I want to talk about. Also, there was some assistance for the lobbyists to get together and write their own code of conduct. Is that underway, Ben? How many Zoom hooeys have you been on so far discussing drafting a code of conduct? Have you? Is it underway?
Look, I know that people are sort of discussing it informally.
Okay, all right, okay. And the last one, what was the last one? The last one was, could you please read the cabinet manual, basically to members of cabinet, and project forward in your mind the possibility that you could become a lobbyist or something like. Anyway, they were pretty piecemeal. What do you reckon, Annabelle? I want to ask you about swipe cards in a second, Ben. But Annabelle, overall, wet bus ticket, meaningful?
No, I don't think it's particularly meaningful. I think it was smart that Hipkins looked like he was taking swift action on it. I think he's operating a pretty high trust model by allowing, the lobbyists themselves to come up with their own standards. And I don't know, it's sort of part of the whole MO of this government who prefer to review than actually do. But I think the most important thing that people will be waiting to see, probably not the average Joe, but people who are interested in this, is the restriction of trade being applied to people moving between lobbying and Parliament and vice versa.
In the form of a stand-down period.
Yeah.
That seems like a big one. The register is the other one that's talked about. Ben?
Most countries have those.
And it wouldn't be
Australia... Yeah, I mean, I think you could have a blanket prohibition on ministers going straight into it. MPs don't really have access to that much special information. Staffers...
Just threads.
Staffers and officials, you'd probably want a stand-down period for areas they were involved in.
Yeah.
So, which...
I mean, we could just import the Australian model, probably. The point that Max Rashbrook made is that, if that's sort of agreed, why not crack on with it? Chris Hipkins was probably pushing it a little bit when he decided to take a swipe at National for having chiefs of staff that had moved immediately from lobbying, given the history of this Labor government and that in at least two examples. But anyway, Ben, what everybody wants to know is, do you or have you ever, as a lobbyist, held a swipe card to the sanctified grounds of Parliament?
I've never had a parliamentary swipe card.
Except when you're a parliamentary staffer.
Oh, yeah, when I was a staffer, obviously. I probably remembered to bring it about 90% of the time. So these swipe cards and the list of people who have them is everywhere from various business delegates, and people who do a sort of a lobbying function, unionists, big corporates, and a few of the people that are sort of identified as third-party lobbyists. I've never had one. I was never sort of motivated to get one. Well, you have to get somebody within the building to sponsor you to have it, but it doesn't. I think it's
and an MP once ran that thought past you, didn't they?
Yeah. So it gets you into the common areas, which is like it gets you through security. So it's it's probably helpful if you're a terrorist, and but I don't mind sort of lining up, and putting my lighter and phone in a tray. It gets you into the cafe. When I worked in Parliament, I used to see some of the people with these cards, and they'd just sort of be sitting by themselves, on the one table at Copperfield's, the cafe that was sort of outside the cafe proper and next to the bridge that all the politicians go over before the House, and sort of just sitting there by themselves, sort of looking up, hopefully hoping to catch someone's eye. And it reminded me way too much of like my first year at university. I was like, it just seems kind of sad. So no, I never got one of those cards. As you foreshadowed, I was offered one once. I was visiting an MP, and he asked whether I had one of the cards, and I said no, I didn't. It wasn't really something I was interested in, and he said no, well, it makes things a lot easier, and he arranged for his EA to send me a form, which I think I might have printed out and then left on my desk for about 3 months and didn't fill out. And then Todd Barclay had to resign as an MP, and so it all became a bit immaterial.
Well, because in a way that's the thing that makes me more squeamish than, because clearly in practical terms, as you say, the swipe card, that particular version of swipe card, offers you almost nothing beyond not having to put your bag through a scanner. But I don't like the idea of MPs being able to sponsor a lobbyist to do it and therefore having that relation. I just don't like it. It just makes me it sends a shiver down my spine. But otherwise, it's an opportunity for someone to impress people. It's like putting a Koru card around your briefcase or something, right? Like it's designed. The only other advantage that I can see is being able to say to a client, say one from offshore, that look, I've got a swipe card to the grounds.
Oh yeah, you're like, here's my pass.
Ta-da,
I'll meet you on the other side of security.
Yeah,
you leave your clients going through, and you're like, hey, see you, sucker. hey, phone me when you get through. Like, it doesn't even make sense, right? But one thing that I have noticed, they publish this list very occasionally. It sort of comes, people remember it exists, and then they'll publish it as a lobbyists list.
Yeah.
My observation is that the people who have these cards, there's a core cadre of people who sort of move from job to job to government affairs for a big company. They move to another big company, move to another big company. And they have the card all the way through, for decades. And I think that I honestly think it's more a function of these. They're just sort of part of the furniture. They get invited to the drinks and stuff, and so they're like, "I know, we always see this person around." So and it doesn't necessarily correlate with who you might think of the more the busier lobbyists anyway. But I think I think it's perfectly reasonable, probably a good idea to get rid of the swipe cards.
It kind of reminds me of people in the 80s and 90s who used to try and do humble brags by marching around Wellington with their briefcases with all the parliamentary stickers on it. Remember how you used to get a parliamentary sticker when you'd go through? And people who were trying to mana vibes would keep all the stickers on, and they'd trot around with their briefcase with 50 crusty old parliamentary stickers, and you were knowing that you were meant to be impressed by how stickery their briefcases were.
That must be the Prime Minister. Will you see all those stickers on those bags? Hey, let's go. But wait, tomorrow is 6 months until Election Day. Are you excited, Annabelle?
No, I'm not. I'm exhausted.
Ben,
call an early one, in my opinion.
Yeah, let's just do it now.
Let's go early.
Let's go this weekend.
Go early.
We do it straight. Budget days just over
Is Chris
a month,
Hipkins
where we
afraid? Is he scared? Is he too scared to call an early election?
Okay, we'll be back with an emergency pod on the snap election very shortly. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Annabelle. Thanks, Sam. Thanks, members. And thanks to you, listeners.
Are you curious about how business can be better? I'm Simon Pound, and I host Business is Boring, a podcast where I korero with some of the most interesting people in entrepreneurship, commerce, and making things happen. Tune in to Business is Boring every Tuesday, brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network in partnership with Spark Business Lab.
Kia ora e te iwi, Te Aihe Butler here, podcast manager at the Spin-Off. If you enjoy listening to our podcasts, consider supporting our mahi by signing up to become a Spin-Off member at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
The Spin-Off Podcast Network.